JFK Airport was busier than ever. The flow of hasty people created an organized chaos where voices mingled, bags slid down the bright ground, and ads echoed through the speakers. In the middle of that whirlwind, Tom Hanks waited patiently in the first-class line. While most passengers held designer bags and wore impeccable clothes, Tom was different. Its look was simple and comfortable. A flannel jacket, worn jeans, and timely sneakers. He held an old backpack, which seemed to have traveled the world with him. He didn't seem to be in a hurry. On the contrary, his posture was quiet. His eyes watched the environment curiously and calmly. But Victor Harding realized, tall, with dark hair well combed and wearing a perfect cutting suit, Victor was the opposite of Tom Hanks. Every detail of him shouted status and power. His luxury clock shone under the airport lights. His expensive perfume announced his arrival even before he said a word. Noticing Tom Hanks in the same row as him, Victor could not hide his disdain. He leaned his head slightly and gave a wry smile. "First class?" he murmured, loud enough for Tom to hear. "Interesting. You never know who can appear here today." Tom, without shaking, he looked at him with a friendly smile. "The world is full of surprises, isn't it?" Victor seemed momentarily bothered. He expected a different answer, perhaps an irritated reaction, an embarrassed look, but Tom just smiled with a calm that disarmed any provocation. Victor frowned and insisted, "Nothing personal, of course, but, well, it's not every day that you see someone so casual in a space like this." Tom kept smiling without showing any discomfort. "And truth, but I think we all belong somewhere." Before Victor could continue the dialogue, the line began to move. The passengers were called for boarding. Victor, with his confident floor, handed his ticket to the attendant and walked into the plane with the certainty that this would be another common trip. He just didn't imagine his biggest challenge was about to start. The line slowly advanced. Anxious passengers delivered their tickets, while the attendant smiled professionally, repeating the same mechanical greeting. Victor Harding was one of the first to enter. His impeccable suit and his haughty posture made a point of stating that he belonged to that exclusive space. He walked with confident steps, without even looking at the employees who organized the entrance. Behind him, Tom Hanks advanced with the same tranquility as before. His backpack hung from one shoulder, and he watched everything around curiously, as if it were the first time he was there, even though he had already traveled thousands of times. Upon entering the first class, Victor took a deep breath, pleased with the sophisticated environment. The luxury around him was something he was used to. The spacious seats, hot and discreet lighting, absolute silence, all of this was part of your reality. He walked to his place, took his ticket to confirm the number, and then settled. But as she lifted her expression has transformed instantly. Right next to her seat, Tom Hanks was settling with the same calm as usual. Victor arched his eyebrows in complete astonishment. He looked at the number on his own ticket once again, as if he couldn't believe what he saw. "This can only be a joke," he murmured, shaking his head with unbelief. He let out a short, dry laugh, as if he was facing a poorly told joke. "Of all the possible seats on this plane, that was to be this soon," he said, crossing his arms, visibly bothered. Tom Hanks, who had just put his backpack under the front seat, turned to him with a friendly smile. "Looks like we'll travel together then." Victor let out an exasperated sigh and rubbed the temples, as if he needed to sue it. It was evident that he didn't like the idea. He looked around, as if expecting a flight attendant to appear and announce that there was a mistake, that it was a mistake. But nothing happened. The discomfort grew in his chest. As a man like him, accustomed to luxury and exclusivity, would he have to spend hours with a stranger who didn't even seem to have money to be there? He settled in the seat, letting out a heavy sigh. Tom, in turn, was still quiet, as if he did not realize the passenger's discomfort by his side. Gradually, the other passengers were settling, and the movement inside the plane was decreasing. The sound of conversations became a low murmur, almost a whisper. The flight was about to start, but for Victor Harding, that would be the most uncomfortable flight of your life. and he still didn't know that this trip would completely change his view of the world. The sound of the aircraft's audio system filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome on board. Please bury the belts as we prepare for takeoff." The engines began to gain power, and the flight attendants passed through the corridors, checking every detail before takeoff. Meanwhile, Victor Harding could not stop throwing stealthy glances at Tom Hanks, still bothered by his presence. The plane began to move on the track, and the silence in the first class was interrupted by Victor's voice. "So, what do you do with life?" he asked with a casual tone, but with a smile loaded with arrogance. Tom Hanks, who was adjusting the position of his backpack under the seat, looked up and answered simply, "I work with cinema." Victor arched his eyebrows and laughed in a mocking way. "Cinema? Commercial type? Small productions?" Tom smiled lightly and shrugged. "Something like that." Victor leaned against the seat, crossing his arms and analyzing tone from top to bottom. "I find it interesting how some people try to find their space, but they don't always belong to certain places, you know." Tom did not respond immediately. He simply observed the landscape through the small window beside him, as if Victor's words had no impact on him. But Victor wanted a reaction. He leaned slightly toward Tom and continued, "Nothing against you, of course. I just find it curious to see someone so simple in the first class. This is usually not for anyone here." Tom remained calm, without showing any irritation. "I think we all have a place, and sometimes that's exactly where we are now." Victor released a short laugh and shook his head. "This is very philosophical, but real life doesn't work like that. Some people simply do not belong to certain circles, and there is nothing wrong with that. These are only different realities." Tom tilted his head slightly to the side as he reflected on the comment. "I think what really matters is not where we are, but how we treat the people around us." Victor narrowed his eyes, feeling that his attempt to humiliate Tom was being frustrated. He settled in the seat, visibly bothered. The plane was already in the air, and the commissioners began to pass the seats, offering drinks. When they reached them, Victor smiled at the commissioner and said in a tone full of self-confidence, "A glass of your best champagne, please. Something that suits this environment." The commissioner nodded politely and turned to Tom Hanks. "And for you?" Tom answered with a serene smile, "Just a glass of water, please." Victor, who was already bringing his cup to his lips, stopped and gave a surprised look at Tom. "Water? First class?" He laughed. "Don't tell me you're going to waste this experience like that." Tom took the glass of water that the commissioner handed him and answered calmly, "Sometimes simplicity is enough." Victor frowned, clearly annoyed that he could not destabilize him. Or maybe some people only accept less because they have never had the best. Tom looked at him with a slight smile, no hurry to answer. Or maybe the best is different for each of us. For a moment, Victor was silent. He did not expect this answer. Around them, other passengers began to notice the interaction. Some already paid attention discreetly, realizing that Victor's tone was more than just a casual conversation. But Tom Hanks didn't seem uncomfortable. On the contrary, he was still quiet, drinking his water as he watched the landscape through the window. Victor, however, did not want to leave cheap. He did not accept to be ignored or contradicted. He leaned back toward Tom and whispered, "You know, there are things that money doesn't buy. But there are also places that some people will never belong, no matter what they do." Tom looked away from the window and stared at Victor in the eye. His countenance was still calm, but there was something different about him now. A firm look, almost as if evaluating Victor in a deeper way. Victor realized that something had changed in the air. He still thought he had control of the situation, but he didn't know that everything was about to change. The sound of the engines filled the silence of the first-class booth. Soft lighting created a climate of exclusivity where only the richest and most influential were usually. But at that moment, everyone seemed to notice the growing tension between Tom Hanks and Victor Harding. Victor took a sip of his champagne, trying to keep the pose, but inside he felt increasing irritation. How was it possible that such a simple man, so below his level, was sitting there by his side without showing any discomfort. Victor could not accept this. He had to prove that this man did not belong there. Backing one arm on the seat support, he leaned slightly toward Tom Hanks, keeping a tone of voice that only the two could hear. Life is like the first class. You work hard, win your space, and finally you can enjoy the best. But some people just arrive here by chance without deserving. Tom Hanks kept looking out the window, the reflection of the plane's lights dancing in his eyes. He did not respond immediately, and that made Victor feel even more in control. Silence was intolerable to someone like Victor. He needed Tom to justify, to react, to confirm his theory of superiority. But what came next was something he didn't expect. Tom turned calmly to him and said, "Funny, because I always thought that when the plane lands, we all reach the same place." Victor blinked, surprised. He did not expect such a simple but powerful answer. For a moment, he knew what to say. Other nearby passengers discreetly diverted their eyes from their own seats and began to pay attention to the conversation. Some exchanged glances, others outlined discreet smiles. Victor, realizing that he was starting to lose control, tried to laugh, but the sound was dry. That was almost poetic. Maybe you should give motivational lectures instead of... Well, that's what you do. Tom Hanks smiled lightly, as if the comment didn't affect him. What we do does not always define who we are, but the way we treat others, yes. The silence in the cabin became heavier. Victor's smile has faltered. He looked around and realized that people were watching. This irritated him deeply. He didn't want to lose, not in front of the other passengers. He had to recover control of the conversation. Then he doubled the bet. "Do you know what is funny?" Victor crossed his arms, taking a louder tone of voice. "People who talk most about humility and simplicity are always those who have never had access to what really matters." Tom Hanks took a small sip of his water before answering. "And I already realized that those who talk a lot about what they have, they are the ones who feel the most something inside them." The impact of the sentence was instantaneous. Victor was silent for a moment, and for the first time I didn't know how to answer. The tension in the air was palpable. The passengers they were listening tried to disguise, but some nodded slightly, as if they agreed with Tom. Victor tried to hide his discomfort, but the truth was that he was feeling something he had never felt before: shame. He forced a smile and released a short laugh, but his eyes no longer had the same brightness of arrogance as before. "I think you really like this self-help chat, don't you?" Tom just smiled and looked back at the window without the need to continue the conversation. Victor, in turn, tried to disguise his frustration, but his body no longer showed the same confidence as before. He had just noticed something he had never imagined before. Maybe he wasn't the smartest man on that cabin, but he still didn't know he was about to be humiliated in a way he would never forget. The plane had been on the air for over an hour. The onboard service continued normally, with commissioners offering meals and drinks to first-class passengers. But within that luxurious space, the atmosphere was no longer the same. Victor Harding felt the weight of the eyes around him. Before, he was confident. After all, he was the most important man of that place, and Tom Hanks, with his simple way and casual clothes, definitely did not belong there. Or at least, that's what he wanted to believe. Now, however, he has begun to notice things he once ignored. The couple, sitting 2 rows ahead, exchanged discreet glances as if they were commenting on him. An old man, wearing an elegant grey blazer, swung his head slowly, as if disappointed. The woman on the other side of the corridor was throwing stealthy glances at Tom Hanks, with a small smile on her face, as if admiring the way he handled the situation. Victor began to feel the discomfort climbing through his spine. "Were everyone on that guy's side?" He squeezed the champagne glass in his hand. "Why was you feeling like this?" He never cared what others thought, but this time it was different. It was as if, for the first time, he was being tried, and I didn't like it at all. He tried to recompose himself. He crossed his arms and adjusted his posture, forcing a smile of superiority. But then something happened. A flight attendant approached. She had a professional smile on her face, but her gaze carried an expression of respect and a slight touch of admiration. She stopped beside Tom Hanks and leaned slightly. "Mr. Hanks," the captain asked him to inform him that his connection in Tokyo is already confirmed. In addition, he sends greetings. The sound of the words seemed to echo through the cabin. Victor froze. The other passengers who were paying attention widened their eyes. The silence was instantaneous. Victor looked at the commissioner, then to Tom Hanks. His brain tried to sue what he had just heard. "Hanks, wait there!" He felt his heart accelerate. "Couldn't be Tom? Hanks?" The name resonated in his mind like thunder. He felt a wave of panic climbing the body. His mouth opened, but no word came out. Tom, in turn, just smiled politely to the commissioner and thanked him. Victor's gaze set out on him, and for the first time since the beginning of the trip, he felt completely powerless. The silence around it became overwhelming. He could feel the eyes of the other passengers turning to him, waiting to see his reaction. Victor, who until a few minutes ago he felt in control, was now sitting next to one of the most famous men in the world, and had passed the whole flight by despising him. He didn't know what to do. His face began to blush. His throat was dry. He tried to laugh, but the sound came out nervous and forced. Tom turned to him with a light smile, as if he was expecting some reaction. Victor tried to speak, tried to find some excuse for his behavior, but he knew there was nothing more he could say. He had just completely lost his credibility. And the worst, he had done it alone. The first-class cabin, once an exclusive and luxury space, now seemed a silent stage of judgment. Victor Harding fired at the seat, his mind working on 1,000. "Tom Hanks! Tom Hanks!" He looked at the man beside him, the same as he had ridiculed throughout the flight. Now reality hit him as a punch in the stomach. The shame burned on his face. He had tried to despise Tom Hanks, and now every passenger in that cabin knew exactly who he was. Victor's gaze swept the environment. The couple sitting ahead whispered something with each other, throwing glances at him. The old man in the grey blazer raised his eyebrows, crossing his arms as if he said, "Well done." The woman on the other side of the corridor held a small smile, clearly pleased with the turn of events. And the worst, the flight attendant he had made the announcement was still there, observing with a neutral expression, but the eyes full of meaning. Victor cleaned his throat, trying to recover some dignity. He needed to fix that. I needed to say something. He laughed nervously. I had no idea that you were, well." He hesitated. How could he fix it? "I mean, you didn't say who you were." Tom Hanks leaned slightly into the armchair and looked straight at him. His face showed no anger. There was no irony or desire for revenge, just serenity. "Why should I?" The phrase stopped in the air as an invisible weight. Victor swallowed dry. The flight attendant, which was still holding the tray, looked at Tom with a discreet nod, showing respect before walking away. Victor felt the impact of the words. He tried to formulate an answer, but everything seemed wrong. "Well, me," he throated. "I didn't want to offend. I didn't know." Tom Hanks kept his eyes on him, quiet but firm. And would that change something? Victor's breathing was stuck in his throat. The silence was deafening. He looked around and realized that all passengers were watching, some discreetly, others without even trying to hide interest. What could he say? What could he do? Nothing. Because Tom Hanks was right. The fact that he is famous should change anything. But it changed. Changed the way Victor saw him. Changed the way he saw himself. Victor sank into the seat, looking away. The weight of reality was overwhelming. He had not only lost control of the conversation, he had lost the chance to demonstrate who he really was, and now there was nothing he could do to go back.